My job is just to ask them a bunch of really difficult questions that they may not have the time or energy or bandwidth to really ask themselves. And then what I do is I typically, for an hour, stand up here and let them do the talking. And most of these people have the answers. I don't sit on top of a mountain and say that I've got a magic solution. I don't, right?
Okay, Naveed, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks.
Naveed, I'm really happy to have you here because you do a multiple different things for the innovation community. The number one, which is you're an entrepreneur in residence at the DMZ, one of Canada's probably most well known and well publicized innovation accelerator and incubator for for early stage companies. So I think this is really prudent of you to be here because we talk to a lot of early stage companies, and I love to dive deep into your mindset of what innovation looks like for you and what you've seen and what you believe will lead us into the light of the pandemic post pandemic future.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and yeah, I think the DMZ's done a great job in terms of nurturing a number of different startups from across the gambit. Um, to answer your question, I think that the there is a big difference between young startups who have an idea
Hmm.
or ideation phase, who don't speak to their customers and are constantly iterating their product, versus those who are constantly, even if it's small iterations, but just going, hey, we spoke to this customer, he's willing to try us out, and even if it's not half the money or a quarter of the money that we were thinking of, at least he's willing to pay for something, and then be able to
Hmm.
develop on that over and over and over again. And I think, it's not me, but it's common knowledge that unless you're constantly iterating based on your customers' needs, and you're not generating revenue and you're not watching your P&L, then it's really just a cool high school project, in my opinion.
Hmm. So speaking of that, one of the things that's been lauded is the idea that innovation equals um, invention times commercialization, right? So invention is like the capture of some kind of IP, intellectual property, right? It could be a product, a service, a process, but unless you commercialize this, take it to market, get the people who buy the product or are willing to put money into it. You don't really have an innovation, right? You're just tinkering. You're just making things in the sandbox, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you go to the famous book of, what's the book, Blue Oceans or Red Oceans or whatever it is, but they talk about this concept of value innovation. And
Mm.
I would agree with you, Ravi. I think innovation, if it's just innovation, but no one's buying it, there's no commercialization. I'll go back to that same point. It's a cool high school project that you're just having fun doing in your basement or with a bunch of friends, and that's okay.
Hmm.
But you should not think that you're going to be the next Mark Zuckerberg,
Yeah.
right? You have to have a client. Someone's got to be able to write you a check. And if they're not willing to write you a check, either once or on a consistent basis, you need to go back to the drawing board and eat some humble pie and say, okay, this isn't working. What do I need to do to really make it of value?
Mm. So how do we fight this growing trend, right? That we're almost being publicized that the startups don't make profit, startups don't make revenue, right? When Amazon just finally recorded its first quarter in raising profits, and we start realizing that a lot of companies are valued not on the current valuation, but what their future could be, whether it be in the public markets or even in the private markets, right? People kind of get into the idea that just have projected values just enough, right? What happens, and a lot of companies get caught up in this. So I'd love to know more about how do you get sales focus, right? How do you get these engineers or people building a hardware company or people building something, actually working on the grind. How do you get them to pick up a phone call and start putting themselves out there, right? I think this is a known struggle. So we deal with a lot of like technical minded founders who have the struggle, right? They're super comfortable in the lab, in the garage, in the behind the computer, behind behind a work desk, but getting in front of customers is not really their forte, right? So do we take these people who are uncomfortable with this and train them and make them good at sales, or do we match them with people who can do these or have these skill sets, and how do we supercharge this?
Yeah, I think that, look, if you're really good at something and you've got this much of a window, you don't want to be retraining an engineer to become the sales guy or the head of sales or the
Mm,
CFO for that company, right? Let him or her do what they're really freaking good at. And that
yeah.
is, build good code, make sure it's stabilized, but also understand that in a pie like this of roles and responsibilities, that is one piece. Just because you've got
Mm,
good code and a good product doesn't mean anything if all the other pieces aren't there. So then,
yeah.
as a startup engineer, understand, okay, this is my lane or this is what I'm good at. What else is missing?
Hmm.
And if I need a CEO, then that's another role. If I'm going to be the CEO, then as a CEO, I need to figure out what those gaps are. But the gaps, particularly on sales, need to be identified quickly. And you
Hmm.
shouldn't be like, I'm doing everything because, it's very tough for an engineer to go out and be your top sales guy. Very tough. It's not impossible, but the odds are against you. And I would say the exact same thing. Tell this top sales guy, hey, by the way, I need you to code. He's just going to give you a blank stare, right? So it's not fair to say, well, the engineer should do the same.
Mm. I completely agree with you. I'm shocked by how many people look at, like, people build companies like and yell at them like, you're not making enough calls. Are you getting in front of customers, right? When what we really need to do is, find these miracle workers that are able to build these products, make these innovations, and connect them to people who can move them, right?
Yes.
And so, what does that look like? Like, is that the responsibility of advisors who join the board? Is it the job of accelerator programs and incubator programs that they join, mentors within those programs? Who can drive the initial sales for early stage companies?
Look, I mean, in terms of the very initial sales, yes, you can go through an incubator. Yes, you can have advisors. Uh, Incubators are going to cost you time, sometimes money, sometimes equity.
Mm,
Advisors, you'll need to have the time, the energy. If they're on your board, that's even more energy and time. Some investors may be able to help you. But those initial sales, that's on you and your team,
mm-hmm,
right? Like, you've got to be able to say, hey, I've got at least one or two customers.
mm-hmm,
And just because you've got one or two customers, Simon Sinek said it the best in terms of that crossing the chasm. Yeah, you could have one or two and they get it, but you need to build a machine that's going to be able to go across and get it to people who don't get it, but will later on. And
okay.
that requires management, that requires leadership, and
Mm-hmm.
those are things that I think a lot of startups, particularly the younger ones, who are first time startups, they're just not getting. I believe.
Mm. That's really interesting. So the initial sales are not really necessarily indicators. It's about the machine that gets you to the larger market, right? What does that
Yeah.
machine look like? What does that mechanism look like?
So, in my opinion, the mechanism or that machine, again, just doesn't depend on the head of sales, right? You could have a really good sales guy, but it's an entire infrastructure and a foundation that needs to get built. So your product needs to work. The customer success needs to be there. The customer success team needs to be there after the sale is done. You need to have your pitch correctly. You need to make sure the P&L works in your favor. Just because you sold something and you're continuously at a loss and you're literally buying customers, which some people say, well, we need to just buy customers.
Mm,
But we were bootstrapped, and so we didn't have the luxury of buying customers, right? We had revenue, we had COGS, and our COGS, and then we had then we had fixed expenses, and then we needed to have a profit. You need to at
Yeah.
least, even if you're not going to get to that profit point of view, you need to understand all those pieces in place in order for that sales machine to really start to go and move forward and be scalable.
Hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I think that's the question of the day, right? Like, how do I take what I have right now and make it? One of my favorite thinkers I've been following and I talk about a lot now is Naval Ravikant, the co-founder of AngelList, and he talks about what he calls points of leverage, right?
Okay.
When you're trying to solve a problem, the different points of leverage you can have, and he calls, there's old types of leverage, which is labor leverage and capital leverage, right? And the new ones are product leverage, media leverage, right? Things that are ethereal, like that are permissionless. And he talks about how by gathering the right points of leverage, you can work this towards moving the problem. And as you solve the problem, that's how you extract revenue, right? You make money on the problems you solve.
Yeah.
So talking about like the mechanism of building it up, right? You can either bring in labor, convince somebody either by selling equity, give them equity, or by make them passionate enough that they come and help you out, or feed you, right? Do labor for you, or you can go and raise capital and then use the capital to hire the people to do that for you, right? But what I'm obsessed with is this new types of leverage, right? Product and media leverage, right? So building out a product that can go out and do something for you that you can't. And part of that could be like an automated marketing cycle, like an automated marketing system, like, built with ads, ad networks, and all those kind of things. There's different pipelines you can do, but also media as like a mechanism, right? So what I love about our permissionless world right now is that you can just jump on a platform and just talk about your idea. You can go on Reddit, you can go on places and go find people that can willingly help you, right? But I really learned from the context of DMZ. This is one of like the kind of well-known institutions for innovation. How do triage companies inside? Like, how do you find out the right company and the right company to work with? What does the winner mindset look like?
Yeah, so in terms of how the companies are selected, that's done by some very talented young people who decide on what companies will go through. They look at they primarily look at your monthly recurring revenue. So if it's someone that has got very low monthly recurring revenue or is very, very choppy, probably not the best for an accelerator program. Probably still
Hmm.
very much on the ideation phase or the
Yeah.
the there's the ideation phase, then there's a validation phase, and then there's the acceleration phase. That's the three buckets that historically DMZ has looked at. So
Hmm.
when you're looking at the accelerator phase, which is where I've been involved, you want to make sure there's a certain amount of MRR. You want to make sure there's a certain amount of runway that's there for the company. It's not that
Hmm.
your MRR is great, but you've only got 2 months of revenue, right?
Hmm.
Or 2 months of runway left. You're going to have a tough time because there's a lot of requirements for for you to be involved in that DMZ.
Yeah.
So I think there's a number of different things that are required, but MRR is definitely one. The soundness and the experience of the team, the maturity of the team is going to
Hmm.
be very important. We're not looking at companies that have got 30 or 40 people. We're looking at, even if you have 6 people, you know, are they able to make good strategic decisions? Do they have the the um, the knowledge and the willingness? And also, if you're entering the DMZ, are you coachable? I think that's a big thing.
Mm.
There's a lot of companies that have great MRR and whatever, and they enter the DMZ. And I've had, CEOs. They're like, yeah, I already know what I need to do. I'm like, okay, well, how can I add value? Now, you know what? I was just told to come here, and I'm like, you know what? That's okay. Probably not the best fit for
Hmm.
this session. You probably need to go and look at somewhere else. And I will give that feedback. Look, you need to be able to be coachable as a
Hmm.
CEO and or as an executive. And I think those are some of the criteria that we look at.
Yeah. Naveed, I'd love to hear about your history of how you came to be at the DMZ. What was the fast ventures that took you here?
Yeah, for me, it was really trying to see how I could, try and stay engaged with the startup community
Hmm.
while trying to also give back.
Yeah.
When I became a CEO of Addictive, I was, for lack of a better word, parachuted in
Hmm.
due to some circumstances. And I unfortunately did not have a network of people that I could go to or rely on or learn from. And I made a shit ton of mistakes, more than I should have, to be
Yeah.
quite honest.
Hmm.
But had I gone through a DMZ or accelerator or had really good advisors, I probably would have made half the mistakes that I did.
Yeah. Can you talk a little about that company? It
Yeah,
says addictive.
absolutely. So Addictive Mobility was still is a mobile ad network. It was created in 2010 by my youngest brother, who was a serial entrepreneur and much better entrepreneur than I could ever imagine being.
Hmm.
Um, and you know, he came to me with the idea that he wanted to move from digital out of home into mobile advertising. And I was a banker historically, was a banker overseas, and he's like, "Look, I just need some help transitioning, managing my P&L, managing the operations as I transition from one type of business, which is digital out of home, to mobile advertising. And
Yeah.
can you help with that?" And I was in between moving from Riyadh to Abu Dhabi, and so I said, "Sure, I'm happy to do that for maybe a month until things get finalized." Well, that month ended up being about 9 months.
Mm.
um, Enjoyed absolutely every single moment of working with Nasser, and we transitioned pretty successfully. We started to build our own tech, started to build out what's called a DSP, a demand side platform, started gaining traction in terms of customers, and we did this all while we were bootstrapped,
Mm.
which was very important, and kudos to Nasser and the team. I then went back into banking, went back into the Middle East, but continued to work with Nasser and the team as they grew. In August 1st of 2012, um, I unfortunately got a phone call that at the age of 34, Nasser passed away in his sleep.
Oh my God.
Um, and yeah, it was tough. But the team was very resilient,
Hmm.
and so coming back after the funeral and everything else, spoke to the team, and they're like, "Look, we think there's something here, and to um, we want to make sure Nasser's legacy lives on." And I was like, "Okay."
Hmm.
So left banking and decided to jump, headfirst into the role. Started off as initially as
Hmm.
an interim COO, and then became the CEO about 6 months later once I knew the lay of the land. But I think the last thing, Ravi, which we probably didn't talk about, which I think is important, is that one of the big things that I believe needs to be important for a CEO or anyone building a company is it can't be about the money.
Yeah.
The money will come, hopefully, right? But it sounds so cliche-ish, and I'm listening to myself as I say it. But um, I believe we were successful because we really wanted to make sure that we didn't screw up what Nasser built. And
Mm.
that was really the foundation of a lot of the people that were there. And they did it for him.
Wow.
They didn't do it for
Wow.
me.
Yeah.
And they wanted to be part of something cool. And as we grew, we got to 56 people. When I came on board, we were only 15. We were just under 3 million in revenue, and we were we were barely profitable. When
Hmm.
we were acquired by the Weather Network in October of 2017, almost 5 years later, we were at just under 12 million in revenue. We were still completely bootstrapped, no debt, and we had EBITDA of just under 1.5 million, and we were at 56
Wow.
staff.
Wow. Wow. Wow.
Yeah, it takes, but you've got to be unhealthily committed.
Yeah. So, oh man, there's a lot you gave us to digest, and I don't want to press too deep here, but was your brother who died, who passed away,
Yes,
and
yes,
his legacy that you took on. I mean, I gotta imagine that that's gotta weigh on you, right, while you're building all this. How did it
that's
affect
right.
the culture of the firm? Like you said, it helped, like give people a purpose other than what the work they're doing, right?
Yep.
Could you tell us about that? Like, where did you have tough times where you weren't making money and things were hard? Like, how did you weather those storms?
Yeah, you look, weathering, so there's good and bad of taking over that
Yeah.
type of scenario. The good is that you surround yourself with people who are really passionate. The
Hmm.
bad is that you will beat yourself, and I did beat myself over if I made a bad call. And
Yeah.
sometimes I was afraid to make a too of an aggressive call, right? Because it wasn't my company. I was a custodian of my brother's company. So where someone would have said, "Oh, you should go out and do this, this, and this," I was like, you know what? I don't want to screw up his legacy. So those were the things that I had to manage in terms of the positive side of it.
Hmm.
Um, we tried to instill Nasser's culture, which was, hey, Nasser always used to say two things: bite off more than you can chew, and then chew like hell. So we had that mentality.
Hmm.
And the other one was, and I was 9 years or 8 years older than Nasser, but he hired very young junior people and said, give them a shot. and
Yeah.
and we did. We hired a lot of young people, and we gave them all shots, and a lot of them were fresh out of university, first time jobs, everything else. But as we started to grow and scale the company, I also began to realize that this isn't going to get to where it needs to be if I'm just going to hire
Mm.
young people around me and surround myself with young people who have not as much experience as they need to scale this thing. So I don't know if you're a sports fan or not. I'm a big basketball fan, but um, what do really good GMs do? And they then have a really good talent pool. They grow them up, but they have guys like Kyle Lowry and others who are 10-year or 15-year veterans to make sure that that stability is there and that maturity is there.
Mm.
And that's what I started to do later on in the following years.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So bring in like some big guns, to show kind of like the path.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. But again, look, I made mistakes. My
Yeah.
worst mistake was I hired a big gun
Mm.
who wanted to join a cool startup,
Hmm.
and but he came from a large organization, from a large media house, and we made a huge press release about hiring this person. 3 months later, he left.
Wow.
And when I spoke to him, he's like, yeah, I really didn't realize how tough a startup was. Um, and I didn't know that. I thought I was going to get a secretary. I thought, I was just going to just call the shots. And I was like, no, my friend, that's not what we do here. You need to put away the plate. You need to wash the glasses, and you need to start by building your own framework and everything else like that. And so it's not just a matter of hiring big guns. It's a matter of hiring the right attitude as well.
Mm. There's a chief operations officer I know. He works at a startup that just it's growing, but he's a very senior person. Like he's been like this is like his probably second or third kind of like move, and he calls himself chief bottle washer. He has to remind himself that all the tasks are important, right? And to humble himself. I think what you're talking about is really interesting because as small companies scale, right, like by bringing in more corporate people, you think you get more serious, but in actuality, like corporate people are good at doing very narrow tasks, right? The larger the organization you come from, the less things the more focused you are, and where a startup is different. I've been on Clubhouse, the app, this whole week, and we've been
Okay.
discussing this idea of one guy, Travis Ratnam. He's the CEO of Knowledge Hook.
Okay.
He's like $100 million unicorn, and he talks
Right.
about one of the mistakes that people do is they think startups are the same as big companies. It's based off of Steve Blank's essay from 2003, like Search versus Execute, right? And it's like startups are not the smaller version of large companies. Startups are basically experiments, right? It's like people in lab coats running experiments, trying to find a repeatable business model. But as you find the repeatable business model and you go from search to execute, that transition of like when you find your model, what you want to move into, is one of the deadliest parts, right? Because bringing in the right people, there was another room where I was talking to, I think that one of the heads of TikTok, and they were talking about how there was like the first 10 people you hire in a company, like is so important because it sets the trend moving forward, the culture and how things are going to be built on. They set the foundation, right? So there's all these pivotal moves that needs to be done, and I think that's what's the main focal, like the main attention of like an accelerator program, right? Is to figure out when you go stop being a startup to go into become an actual business, when you can actually go from search to execute and jumpstart to move forward. So laying off of your experiences of what you learned from Addictive, right? What led you to go to an accelerator to help out, to give back?
Yeah, as I said, I think my main thought there was how can I make sure people don't screw up as much as I screwed up,
Hmm.
right? That was
Yeah.
really it. I mean, there's nothing more. There were just so many mistakes that I made, and if there was any way, shape, or form that I could make sure that people just didn't screw up as much as I did, then I've done
Mm.
something good,
Yeah.
right?
I
And
think nothing
uh,
nothing haunts more than a failed startup or a failed idea, right?
yeah, I mean, I don't know. I haven't had that experience in terms of
Yeah, yeah,
uh, starting something right from scratch. I'm doing that now, but I've got a very sort of different approach to this, where if this thing fails, that's okay. But I don't want to go out and raise money right now. We're just in the
yeah,
process of, we're in the ideation phase, and a couple of the
yeah,
people that I'm working with are like, so when do you think we should raise? I'm like, we will look at raising once I'm comfortable that I'm not going to go and throw somebody's money away,
yeah.
right? That's just me.
Hmm.
Somebody else say, you know what, don't worry about it. Go get some. But why would you do that if you yourself have not done enough due diligence and put your own money and skin in the game to get to
Mm.
that point where, yeah, now it can actually go, because that money should be a turbo boost. It shouldn't be part of your fact finding, because then I think that just sets a wrong tone.
Yeah, that's really interesting you say that because getting money to come in, that's ideally when money wants to come in, right? You want to find that investment, or if you're an angel investor or later, that really the people know what they have built something or they have something, and your money is going into like boosting it, getting it to market.
Yeah, I may be different. I mean, I may be the dumb one, or the one that is doing it the wrong way. I don't know, right? I just know that, look, I don't want to take somebody's money and blow 600,000 or $1 million and turn around to that guy and go, yeah, sorry, we actually didn't know that we had product market. We didn't even know that we could actually do this thing, but I blew away 1 million of your hard-earned money.
Yeah,
I know how hard it is to make money. Why should I do that to somebody? Is my opinion.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean that is definitely tough, right? But going back to with the work you do now with companies, can you isolate more about like what your day to day looks like? How you help, like how do you work with early stage companies, and the type of wisdom you like to impart on them?
Yeah, so there's no look. What I try and do with most companies is the following,
Yeah.
and I let them know this, is that in any good session, I should be
Hmm.
talking no more than 10 to 15% of the time.
Yeah.
right? My job is just to ask them a bunch of really difficult questions that they may not have the time or energy or bandwidth to really ask themselves. And then what I do
Mm.
is I typically, for an hour, stand up here and let them do the talking. And most of these people have the answers. I don't sit on top of a mountain and say that I've got a magic solution. I don't,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
What I do though is ask a number of questions. So just before I came on with you, I had a session. Wonderful company, not going to name them. Um, they're going through a major challenge right now.
Mm.
They are trying to take advantage of a certain health situation,
Mm.
obviously COVID,
Yeah.
and you weren't necessarily built for that, but they're scrambling and they're trying to get leverage.
Mm.
But the CEO right now is challenged because he's a first-time CEO. The chief operating officer was it's her first time, doing this, and they could potentially screw up some of their biggest clients right now because in-house it's a mess. And so I said, look, what are your priorities?
Mm.
And they said, look, the priorities are going to be, and we actually had six.
Mhm.
And I said, okay, is this important? No, not really. Removed it. What about this? No. Okay, removed it. Then we ended up with only three priorities, right? And I said, okay, now, and I didn't come up with them, they did. And I said,
Mm.
okay, there were two people on the call. I said, okay, person number one, identify one, two, and three. And then I said the same thing for the other person, identify one, two, and three. And they started to communicate with each other and they realized that, okay, these are the priorities. And yes, coaching definitely is number one, profit sharing is number two, and then strengthening the leadership and stabilizing that is number three. So the final conclusion was, we really need to start focusing on cleaning up our house versus going out and getting brand new business on top of a rickety house that we already have.
Mhm.
That came from them, not me.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You're pretty much guiding them through this. Like, so I went through this with when I was at the University of Toronto at the hub. I went through the first incubator program, and Greg Graffam, the director there, did exactly this. It's mostly just that, listen to me decompress my anxiety and angst, and then try to mine out some truth out of it, and then just remind us that these problems exist, and you got to go out get back out there. But with what you're saying, resonates so much, right? So sometimes having an outside perspective that just peers through the mess and be like, okay, let's pick through this, right? Let's work on this together, and just like from a different perspective, looking at things outside in, just literally cleans up the mind. Um, a lot of times we get, like entrepreneurs get messy, like they get used to the mess, and they start working in multiple things, and then their focus gets lost, right? So essentially what you're saying is you help people remain in focus, right, towards a larger goal.
I guess.
Mm.
I'm more of a sounding board, more of, yeah, maybe that's it. That's a good way of putting it, Ravi, is
Yeah, yeah.
I try and get people to refocus.
Mm.
I'm going to
Awesome.
use that now. Moving.
Perfect. So speaking of that, the type of companies, right? So what type of companies come to the DMZ? What type of companies land across your desk?
So within the DMZ, it's a complete gambit, right? It could
Mm-hmm.
be from B2B to B2C, from healthcare to manufacturing, focus to advertising. It's a gambit that comes across the DMZ.
Mm-hmm.
My role in Can Health is very particular. Was very much focused on healthcare,
Yeah.
right? Um, but I think the one similarity that all the companies have is that they're strong engineering based or they're strong tech based companies versus, and ideally if they get to the accelerator program, they're not necessarily a service based company.
Mm-hmm.
They're a
Mm-hmm.
product based company that they're looking at scaling.
Mm. Interesting. So a product-based company that they're scaling. So generally, B2B SaaS companies are like the go-to right now. Um, Is that heavily on the pile? Is there any hardware companies? Like, what does it look like?
No, they and you're right. Yeah, B2B SaaS companies is the cool hip new thing right now. And I understand why, because it's recurring revenue,
Yeah.
right? And if you're looking at, getting that amazing valuation, then the best valuation comes to those who are SaaS model companies.
Hmm.
Uh, that being said, we were never a SaaS company. Did we get the best valuation? No, but you know what? We built good stuff. We were profitable. We scaled. We were bootstrapped. So you can still do that stuff, I believe, and not be a SaaS company.
Yeah. I've been talking to a few companies lately, that are really always at the edge, right? They're you know exactly what you're talking about. Like they're between they found their search, and they're trying to transition into um, execute model, right? Trying to turn into a business and grow. But one of the struggles is between that time frame is you're not making any money, or if you're not raising any money, if you don't have money in the bank, right? And salary is not there. It's very easy for your mindset to get weakened, right? What do you think about how we support innovation overall? And there's few large scale ideas. Andrew Yang brought it up in the States when he ran for political office. And with the idea of universal basic income, this idea that there'll be like a flat rate for all citizens, therefore a cushion. It's not enough to completely survive, but it's enough that there's suddenly something coming in, and we've been kind of experiencing that now with CRB and previously with SERB. There was a lot of innovators, a lot of early stage companies, founders, and small business owners that really benefit off this. But for the first time, there was like a whole population being like knowing that there's a consistent income coming in no matter what, right? And that they can grow off of and bounce off of. And it's really like captured the imagination of people. And it all feeds back to more like Richard Friedman's theories out of the Chicago School Business, talking about how there should be almost like a negative income tax, where if you're below a poverty line, there's guaranteed income. And the idea of guaranteed income is that capitalism, where it's not a zero sum game, where we have your income is not zero, right? Regardless of that, the system values you as a productive member, right? You're going to be paid out, but then it's your job to get it to a different level, right? Think about income streams. So whether you access your labor, or you build out something, or a business, or or like you become like a freelancer, whatever it is that you do, right? Your job is to get more income, and you can value your thoughts about that. Do you have any thoughts or frameworks about how we support innovation for a greater, like from like a wider scope of things as a
Yeah,
society?
look, I think what you said is really good
Hmm.
and very very noble, very Canadian. I think that's great when it comes to the mass audiences, right? And I'm a full believer
Yeah.
in that process when it comes to making sure that no one goes below a certain poverty line or anything else like that. That being said, um, you know, I'm more of the kind of Mark Cuban mindset,
Mm.
and that is that look, entrepreneurship isn't for everybody,
Mm.
and and you have to really make sure that if you're not going to, um, you don't want to cushion somebody so much. Say you have a bunch of average companies, right? You want to be able to really put your money on, and maybe it's a Canadian thing. I don't know. Some people have said it's a Canadian thing, but you really want to have 10 other Shopify's, right? Uh,
Hmm.
but that means that you're going to have, if you have 10 other Shopify's, that means you got to let 50 or 100 companies die
Mm.
that haven't hit the mark. And that should be okay with us, in my humble opinion, right? Doesn't
Interesting.
mean we don't
Interesting.
support that, but if you're not, it goes back to that same point that I said very early, right? Or halfway through our conversation. Um, I could do the easy thing and say,
Mm-hmm.
look, I exited a company. I've got some good people surrounding me. I'm going to go out and raise right now. And whether I make it or not, that's
Mm-hmm.
their money,
Yeah.
right? Um, and people do that. But I want to, I think it's more valuable when I've got my own money on the line,
Mm-hmm.
right? I'm going to really, really work. I'm going to put my blood, sweat, and tears into this because this
Mm-hmm.
every single dollar is mine that's being spent. I'm going to be 10 times, I'm going to have to be 10 times smarter,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because that mindset of, oh, I'm going to get bailed out, oh, it's not my money. I think is this, for me personally, I think it's an easy escape route.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's just my view.
No, I absolutely agree. Sometimes when you're pushed to that wall, you're pushed to that need that really brings out the creative juices. Um, so going back to that, right? Like, yeah, but not everybody can be entrepreneurs, right? I'd love to dive into this because we're seeing because of automation. We're seeing the new industrial wave hitting us. A lot of jobs are at the risk of being automated and going away. And the thoughts coming up is like, what do people to do? And the idea is that even though automation is taking away information worker level work, right? Like right from the information age, the new type of worker, Peter Drucker, I think, termed this. It's called knowledge worker, right? The new age worker is going to be people who solve problems, who leverage knowledge, deep knowledge in particular fields, and to solve complex problems and get paid out for that. And the two between the two is that information workers of the previous age, white collar workers, went in and they process information. Right, they did a very linear task, inputs and outputs. But knowledge workers, they're input into a level where they're trying to improve, exponentially by either building a process or a product or deliver a service that can improve over time, right, with exponential results. So within that is, I think, entrepreneurs and founders, right? People trying to scale these massive companies, trying to build up entire businesses. But there's also within that a whole bunch of services being provided, right? People, freelancers, particular professions of professionals, mentors, advisors, people with like a network of a book of business that they sell out, right? Like there's all these people who are getting more, like they're leveraging knowledge, they're leveraging like their external capital, right, to make plays into within the innovation industry, right? What are your thoughts on like the growing ecosystem around innovation, especially in Canada?
Yeah, and again, look, I'm all of what you said is absolutely spot on, right? You do have different types of groups, but again, and anyone can be an entrepreneur. The guy
Mm-hmm.
who has his own taxi or is an Uber driver and decides that he's going to be his or her own boss, that for me is an entrepreneur, right?
Mm-hmm.
It may not be in tech, it may not be scaling to a million people or 1,000 people company or 100 people company, but he
Mm-hmm.
is an independent, self-employed worker. And
Yeah.
oh, sorry, that would be self-employed. I think an entrepreneur is somebody different. Sorry, let
Yeah.
me redefine that. An entrepreneur is somebody who is not just going to take that knowledge base, but really wants to build a business,
Mm-hmm.
right? And really wants to scale a business, and solve a number the same problem for a number of people, not just for one person. An Uber driver solves it for that one person who's going to take from point A to point B, right?
Mm-hmm.
A
Yeah.
person who owns a pizza store down there solves it one at a time, right? But it's not a scalable business. For an entrepreneur, particularly a tech entrepreneur, you need to be of the mindset that I want to solve a problem that is got a big enough target addressable market or a service addressable market, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to not just build a product, I'm going to build an entire mechanism, an
Yeah.
entire infrastructure. I'm going to build and grow people and grow a company with a proper P&L. That I think is very different than just being a simple entrepreneur.
That's that's really interesting, right? Because there was a talk done by I always forget his name, but he wrote the book Rich Dad Poor Dad, and he talks
Oh
about
yeah,
four quadrants, right? He talks about people falling into four quadrants, right? One is the
right.
workers who are just trading their time for money, right? They're the linear workers, getting paid out for linear work, and others are small businesses. Those are the third category I always forget, right? But sorry, the second category I always forget. The third category being small businesses and then enterprises, right? And there's a vast difference between small businesses and enterprises. Small businesses, are generally run by a few people or a solopreneur, and they only run when the actual owners are operating it. Whereas enterprises work regardless if their owners work or not. They're asset classes, right? And they're two different kind of things. So an entrepreneur essentially is trying to build an asset class, as a
Yes,
self-operating vehicle, right? Very
yes.
different from a small business, which is just an entity, a legal entity that just houses a bunch of people together and operates them towards a task, right?
Absolutely. And there's nothing wrong with either of them. But
Mm,
if you're going to become an asset class enterprise, to go back to your initial point, that should not be subsidized. There should
mm,
be no minimum on this thing. That is hard. You need to
yeah.
get your ass kicked. You need to have hundreds of doses of reality. You
Mm,
need to go through the grind, and then you'll be able to get to that enterprise level. Otherwise, you can stay here, and that's okay,
yeah.
right? And we can subsidize you and do all that for the global good and the economy and everything else. Or you can be here. But if you're going to
Hmm.
get to here, right,
Yeah.
and you're going to compete globally where everybody else in the world is going to try and kick your ass,
Mm,
right? You need to have a different mindset. You need to have balls of steels, and you need to be beaten the shit out of, to be honest with you.
I love that. I love
Not
that.
be freehand.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that was the best case for a free enterprise that I've actually heard. Um, so going back to this, right? Like entrepreneurship and supporting entrepreneurship. In the Atlantic region, I believe in Nova Scotia, there was a fintech company recently that got acquired, and the acquisition was 10% of I think Nova Scotia's entire GDP, like yearly GDP. And the
That's
whole
awesome.
Atlantic region just woke up, and the whole Atlantic region just woke up, and they're like, "Hold on, wait, what did these groups of people did? Were like working in small fishing villages and on internet, built this inferior fintech company that got acquired for a large sum of money." And they're
Amazing.
like, "What is going on here?" And now there's this whole flurry of activity in the Atlantic provinces supporting entrepreneurship. We had the CEO of Propel Accelerator on the podcast talking about this and how excited things are. But more than that, like now, the what's it? The Minister of Education Innovation said announced a federal program to be helping to increase Wi-Fi internet, right? Wi-Fi, sorry, not Wi-Fi, internet to more rural areas of Canada. We're a wide nation, and not all places have access to connections. There's $100 million project to to provide more internet to the Atlantic regions, like a cable running through Hudson Bay, I think, to like Nunavut. Crazy stuff that we're doing, right? So one of an interesting thing is you talked about entrepreneurship being hard and not meant for everybody, right? Should we not at least equalize access to it? Remove the tyranny of location, so that at least with internet we can work from anywhere.
But that's not entrepreneurship. That's basic
Mm,
necessities. So
yeah.
that's where I'm saying that uh, I'm a big believer in our social system, in our social
Okay.
welfare program, and ensuring that everyone gets fed, everyone has internet, everyone has really good schools, everyone has free healthcare. I'm a absolute believer in all of this.
Mm,
But what I'm saying is, if you want to get to that other thing of building an asset, that you could potentially make millions and millions of dollars and secure you and your next generation or next three generations lifetime. Well, that's
Mm-hmm.
hard. And
Yep.
do not make this thing like, oh, anyone can do this.
Yep.
No,
Yep.
you need to go through a whole bunch of pain
Yeah.
to get there, is what I'm saying.
Gotcha. Gotcha. One last point to throw at you, and I'd love to get your opinion on this. Scott Galloway, NYU professor,
Love it.
I love him, a huge fan, right? And he talks about this. It's like, even though entrepreneurship is now sexy and like we profitize it, um, we're actually at a historical low for it. You know, on a 50-year yield curve for entrepreneurs in entrepreneurship, right? We're like, based off the cost of living has gone up tremendously up, and the level of entrepreneurship has actually gone down. And even though we publicize them and see more of it in our media and social media, that people, starting companies, getting acquired and bought, and so it's becoming more popularized, right? As a profession, we actually have a prevalence of less people in it, right? Into the game. So, do you feel that, what is your thoughts on this, right? Like, at least, right? Like, so the reason the social welfare program was to make it so that people from lower income areas could take the risk of entrepreneurship, can jump into that game, right? So I absolutely agree with you that the hardships of getting there is there, but for certain people, the starting point line is so much vastly different, right? How do they get out of that? If entrepreneurship is like a system to get out of poverty, or a system to to capitalize yourself and grow, should we should we be concerned about equalizing that playing field?
And again, we should absolutely give everyone the opportunity and the tools. So, we should have incubators. We should have
Yeah,
accelerator programs. We should have more mentors. We should have things like the Can Health ecosystem that can help bring about companies and help them compete against the US guys.
yeah, yeah,
Absolutely, right? But what we shouldn't do is, just be there to say, here's $500,000 of government money, and it's okay if you fail, right?
mm, yeah,
Um, and or if you just stay status quo,
yeah, yeah,
right? Um,
yeah,
Support them, have the government of Canada or a provincial government say, we're going to go to Amazon and we're going to do XYZ so you can start at a good foundation. But the rest is up to you, right?
gotcha.
We cannot be having people hold your hand all the way through if they want to get to that. The rest of it, do what we need to do. But this is hard. And
Yeah,
I just don't want people to think, to your point, this whole glamorization of, I'm going to create the next TikTok, or I'm going to create the next Instagram, or whatever.
yeah,
It's fucking hard,
mm.
right?
Yeah, Naveed, I love this. Entrepreneurship is hard. It reminds me of JFK, the quote by JFK. We do things because they're hard. Um, that right. So going on this, I love the theme of this talk. I love the stories you've shared with us. Thank you so much for coming on. Love to have you again in 6 months and follow up with more stories.
Sure. No, absolutely. Ravi, listen, thank you so much for your time. And if there's anything else that I can do in the future, please let me know. But I think what you guys are doing, that's laying that strong foundation, right?
Thank you,
Is the
thank
knowledge
you.
sharing.
Yeah,
And I continue to do that, because that's what's going to make hopefully people listening to this saying, oh, okay, this, and this. Now I can learn from it. That's going to give us a strong foundation to go up to the next level.
absolutely. Perfect. I mean, we're going to close off on that. Stick around for a few minutes. We can do a quick debrief. But for everyone who tuned in, thank you so much, and thank you again.